Hello, everybody. It is Saturday night at 10 o'clock. I am Chris Weave. I have Alec Peters with me this week, which, Alec, did you ever notice how you can, based upon how an episode of the original series started, you can always tell with like one screenshot as to which episode it's going to be?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they were always very distinctive. And I'm wondering how many people have figured out that if you get the 30-second countdown followed by the Axanar thing and the person doesn't screw it up, then that means you're on the show. Because every time I try to do the timing, I always boff it. So I think that one of the things, I think I've mentioned this before, one of the things I want to talk with you and Stogie and whoever it is that does these sorts of things for Axanar is to do like a 30-second timer that's like an Axanar branded 30-second timer.
That's a good idea.
30-second timer. So let's
we definitely.
Oh, okay. One of us just froze, and I think it's you.
And my internet has been cutting out tonight. That's the third time it's cut out.
Okay.
But right. I guess I was saying, this timer, the 30-second timer, is part of StreamYard, I guess.
Yeah. The 30-second is a StreamYard one. So I run once a year, sometimes more than once a year, I run an online professional wargaming conference called Connections Online, which is going to be next Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So any of you who are really, really into wargaming from sort of a professional standpoint, do a search for Connections Online. And you'll find the Armchair Dragoon site where you can sign up for this thing. But we always do branded timers, 30-second timers, and we use Mars, the god of war, from Hulse the Planets to do the 30-second countdown, and then Space Invaders or something like that. So
very cool. So what's on the table for tonight?
So tonight I was going to continue going through sort of the naval summary stuff. You made a really good suggestion last time that rather than sort of go through and then ask for questions at the end, that I just sort of ask for questions and comments as we go through. And as everyone might remember, this is this thing that I had started a while ago, and then I ended up in the hospital. Then we had TJ come on to do a couple of long series of stuff, and a few other things happened here and there. And I basically set it aside. I was like cruising along, just pumping out stuff. And then we took like a 6-month hiatus. So I'm trying to sort of get everybody back up to speed, including me, get everybody back up to speed so I can move forward and sort of do some new stuff there. But first of all, I want to ask a question or make a statement, because Alec, you're old enough to remember this. Do you think that everybody was kung fu fighting?
Oh God, what a great song!
Yeah. I'm not sure I would say it was a great song, but it was definitely a fun song.
Oh, fun song, absolutely fun song. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It was absolutely a fun song. Gosh.
So, and I just realized I'm going to put something up on the stream, and then I'm going to have to quickly go back to wait a minute. I can actually go back to the beginning of the slide deck. I forgot to reset it to the beginning of the slide deck, and I just discovered I've got a little control that lets me do that. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. So this is me going through. I did a series of briefs early on, I guess middle of last year. It was like May and June of last year, and I'm sort of getting everybody back up to speed. But before that, so I've been sort of heads down doing Connections Online stuff, but that's going to be all over by this time next week, at which point my focus is going to be shifting to Marcon. So the plan is still to do, I've got basically the equivalent of a 2-bedroom apartment in the Hyatt Hotel where Marcon is in Columbus, Ohio, Memorial Weekend. I'm there Thursday through Sunday night. So if people want to come by, I'm providing a space for people to hang out. Just come to the con, get a hotel room at the con. And for those who are interested, the next morning, I figure we'll wake up early, do breakfast, drive to Dayton, Ohio, do the Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio. Everybody can then, after we're done there, we'll do dinner, and people can either spend the night or start their drive home. And so I'm going to try to do a little questing around for hotels in the area. But please, please go ahead and start making arrangements if you're all interested in that. And at some point, I'm going to create a channel, hopefully by this time next week, where people can send me a notification of whether they're planning on coming or not, because I'm trying to arrange for some food in that space, and it'll help if I can say, hey, I know that there's going to be 15 people there or something like that. So this is just too good an opportunity to do it. David Weber is going to be the guest of honor. A bunch of my Bu9 colleagues are going to be there. And so it should be a lot of fun. So that's it for that. And it looks like up until the 20th of May, I'm going to be around, and I'm planning on doing shows. For most of those, we won't have Pat. Towards the end, we don't know if we have Pat or not, because he doesn't have his airline schedule yet. But Pat's definitely not available next week. He's going to be at the Space and Rocket Center in Huntsville, Alabama, for a science fiction convention, a science fiction gaming convention. It's more gaming than it is science fiction, and it's in Huntsville. And so I've got this image of there being like a table set underneath the Saturn V, but I don't know how they're doing it. And so he's going to be down there, and then he's got some other stuff he's got to do. So he's pretty slammed these days. He's pretty busy. So, but I'll be around. So you got me.
Right.
Okay.
You're busy.
Yeah.
And by the way, I didn't mention in this one, but I do want to mention this in this thread. And I don't. Let's see. Let me pop it up. But John Iacovelli, who was the Emmy Award-winning production designer on Babylon 5, passed away from cancer. And he was I will share this. I'm going to switch up on you here if you don't mind.
No, go for it.
This is the LA, big enough that LA Times put out an article about him. And he was 64. John had agreed to be production designer on Axanar when we were making a movie, and visited our set a number of times. And I did a shopping trip with him to one of the big fabric places, and kind of like fabric's the wrong word, but materials places in right on. I think it was on Sunset in LA, and then he graciously took me to meet John Copeland, the producer of Babylon 5, who had since retired and lived up in Santa Ynez. And we drove up there, which was like 2.5 hours or something, and had lunch with John. It was wonderful, wonderful. I posted the picture on Facebook. But John Iacovelli was just he was so well known in Hollywood. He was doing so much theater. He actually didn't even win his Emmy for Babylon 5. He won it for this show Lincoln Heights, which was a medical drama. But John would do, as you can see here, he was just so deep into the LA theater scene, and was doing lots and lots of shows. This is a great article. Just go to LA Times and search John Iacovelli here, and it's certainly worth a read. And he was just, an epic guy. He taught. He actually was teaching theater design up at UC Davis. He used to commute back and forth. And just so generous and so giving, and just so young at 64. I mean, and passed away from cancer. And I've talked with him infrequently over the years, but in 2015, he had a Christmas party at his house, and we got to go there, and it was really fascinating because he's in Glendale, and on this one street were all these different homes with the identical floor plan, but each exterior style was different. So there'd be one that was Tudor, and one that was like Middle Eastern, and one that was like, like a Western Ranch, the same exact house, but in different styles. And it was fascinating. And of course, he had one of these. You know, I'm sure that the houses were from like the 30s or 40s, and inside was just such a, you know, he had so many. It was a tribute to not only a theater production designer, the way his house was decorated. It was wonderful, and he was just the nicest chap. And I'm very, very saddened to I don't want to bring everyone down, but please read the article in the LA Times, because John was really a wonderful guy.
And I think I remembered seeing on your Facebook page that John Copeland died too.
No. John Copeland didn't die. John Iacovelli died. John Copeland was the one who posted the notice about John dying.
Oh, okay.
And so I reposted. I think I reposted John Copeland's post at one point. So yeah.
So in related news, I don't know how posting works apparently, because I spent the day thinking that John Copeland died.
Oh no, yeah. John Copeland actually owns an olive vineyard up in Santa Ynez, and makes olive oil. It was actually interesting hearing him talk for an hour on olive oil. We went up there. I went up there at the time I was seeing Diana Kingsbury, and we went up there, took a trip up there, and learned all about olive oil, and it was really fascinating.
It's always fascinating talking to a professional about their job.
Oh yeah, I agree.
I've got a friend who runs a painting company, and I started asking him questions about paint one day, starting off with, is Sears Weather Beater any good? And we talked about that, and, you know, like he said, oh yeah, it's fantastic. It's fantastic. Well, do you use it, Scott? No, I don't use it, because, you know, for them, a big order of paint is 5 gallons. For me, a small order of paint is 200 gallons.
Wow.
So yeah, because I mean, he's a professional painter. I mean, like, he paints big structures too. I mean, he does like parking garages and stuff.
Oh my gosh.
And so we went through like the difference between paint design for you and me. Like, no drip paint is much thicker than what professionals use. Professionals use paint that's harder to paint with, but lets you do different things. And professionals are willing to do like 4 coats of paint. Like, I'm not willing to do 1 coat of paint, let alone 4. And then we talked about how paint was made and stuff like that. And at some point he just looks at me and says, you must be really bored with this conversation. It's like, I'm asking questions. What makes you bored? Yeah. And it's just fascinating how all that works. There's only like 5 different places in the country that, at least this was true 20 years ago, that make the base for paint. Paint is like gasoline. All the gasoline is the same until it gets to very close to the end point and they start putting shit in it. The gas, Exxon and Standard and Amoco and all the other ones, the gas is all the same up until the point when it comes out of the pipeline.
Right.
Start differentiating it.
Yes, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense.
So all gasoline is local, just like politics. So Jen says, I'm getting a bit nervous about the number of folks passing around my age. Yeah, tell me about it.
Yeah. I also read something interesting. And it was, and it basically was we were talking, I think I was talking with someone about, how many people are living to their 90s? Like, you know, people die in their 90s all the time these days. You know, especially you hear people that they're talking about, like, you know, I was like, oh, Stan Lee was 94, and Ernest Borgnine was 92, and all these people and you're going, wow, a lot of people living in the 90s, because, you know, 30 years ago people were dying in their 70s. Yeah. You know, and now they're dying in their 90s, except a lot of people dying in their 60s from cancer. And I think it was, I'm not sure if it was a doctor I was talking to or not, but we were talking about, and they said, well, if you're going to get cancer, you're going to get it in your 50s or 60s. It said, not a lot of people die from cancer in their 70s and 80s. I was like, oh, you know what? That makes sense. That's true.
Yeah.
And so it's like, man, I just hope I get out of my 60s okay. And then I can worry about the next 30 years of my life. But
yeah, there was something else I was going to say about that. There's some like apparently, if a guy lives long enough, he will get prostate cancer.
Oh, Michael Dorn was talking about that on the Shuttlepod show. And Michael Dorn got prostate cancer and was freaked out by it. And he went to like the urologist to the stars who treats everyone. And the guy was like, he said, Michael, everyone gets prostate cancer. Men. He said, every man gets prostate cancer. Yeah, some of them, it's just not that big a deal. And Michael Dorn was like, everyone gets it? He said, and the guy said, there's only one group that doesn't get prostate cancer. And Dorn was like, who? He goes, vegetarians. The doctor was like, never met a vegetarian with prostate cancer.
Interesting.
Wow. But 30 years ago, I knew that red meat contributed to prostate cancer. I had been told that, and by a doctor. And I'm not a big red meat eater anyway, and I pretty much gave it up. I probably have red meat once a month, but I've never, but yeah, that was something that I knew long ago, but I didn't know that being a vegetarian could mean avoiding it altogether. So so just make sure you go for your annual physical, guys.
Yeah, it's definitely the case that not all cancer is created equal.
So, yeah. You got to catch it early enough. And Right Sublet says his dad made it to 88. Listen, my dad's 88 right now. Now, sadly, he got COVID, and being a 50-year smoker, it really he's got long-term effects of it. Yeah. And it's really, it's really taken its toll on him. But I think, just as medicine improves and nutrition improves and knowledge improves, the older, as we move, the age that we can live to gets older and older. I mean, so right now, 90s is not unusual. And by the time we're, 30 years from now, when I'm 92, the average, there'll be lots of people living to be 110, 115, 120. That's not going to be unusual in 30 years. I was listening to a podcast with a aging specialist, a longevity expert, and this was 10 years ago. I bet I listened to him. Let's say it was 5. He said the first person that he said that people will live to be 150 years old. And he said, it's quite possible that person is already alive.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, that's kind of crazy, but that's where it's stressful. So now really the frontier, the important frontier of medicine is Alzheimer's research.
Yep. Well, so one of the places where I think they dropped the ball on Star Trek Picard is they jumped the timeline forward about 30 years. They should have jumped it forward 70 years.
7 or 70?
70.
Oh, wow.
And when people say they don't look like they're that they only look 30 years older, the answer is, well, yeah, but that's because they lived to be 300. Right. And they should, I kind of mentally add on, with the exception of Wesley, I add on about 15 years onto everybody's age. So I think, in my mind, Picard was like in his mid 60s in TNG. He just looked that good.
Yeah.
This sort of explains some bits in his career path. But and there's some very interesting possibilities there. I mean, I remember having this discussion with David Weber about the Honorverse, because in his timeline, They're in the second generation of the, I think they call it Rejuve in his universe. I'm trying to remember what they call it. Everybody comes up with their own term for the
life extension
drug, the life extension drug. And so they're in the second generation of that stuff, the stuff that they started giving to kids early on. And if you think about it, that could really, really screw up your society.
Oh, yeah.
If you're not prepared for it. The thing is, it works for the Manticorans, and it works for the Manticore Navy because they were undergoing such tremendous expansion, right? It's okay for people to hang around in the same career path for 60 years or more, because they're expanding so much that's actually a feature, not a bug. But otherwise, just think about it. It could be like the U.S. Navy after the Civil War, where you had people that would be a midshipman for 15, 20 years and would retire as a lieutenant because there just wasn't any mobility. So
yeah.
What do you do if the only way to get promoted is for somebody above you to leave and everybody stays in their job for 30 years?
Yeah. Well, I spent a lot of time over the last few weeks watching YouTube and listening to experts and doing research on demographic collapse. Because, of all the stupid things that Elon Musk said, one of the things he said was he said population decline was like the greatest threat to our society or something like that, which is not true. Elon Musk is an idiot at times. However, the problem is, in fact, significant. And I saw a graph that they were talking about. I saw a YouTube video talking about China's population problem. So in 1960, China had 600 million people. And they now have, 63 years later, they now have 1.3 billion people. By the year 2100, they will be back down to 600 million people, and it will destroy their economy. And this is a lot of people are talking about this now, about Chinese demographic collapse, population collapse. And there's a lot of reasons for it. And the one-child policy, the aging population, the increase in wealth, whatever. A lot of the problems in China are problems all over the world. Women are like, I'm not going to have kids when I'm 20, or, I'm not going to marry this loser. I can have a job now. I don't need a man. So there's a lot of reasons for it. But what's fascinating is it is a huge problem. Yeah. And countries that entered demographic decline cannot reverse it. There's not been a successful. There's a lot of I've been listening, and there are a lot of countries that have tried to alter the course of their demographic decline and have not been able to, paying people to have kids and such and such. And the United States is in an interest and, is also going through that. But right now, the United States is in a gray zone. No one knows how it's going to affect the United States, because it's quite possible that even with our aging population, that our country is going to be okay. One of the key factors in the United States, and this is just to go show you, forgive me, people, for being political. Why the Republicans don't know what the fuck they're talking about is because immigration is one of the things that can prevent it. And China has zero immigration. No one immigrates into China, not only because the most xenophobic motherfuckers in the world, but it's not a society that you immigrate into. There's not a reason to go to China. Whereas the United States, everyone wants to come to the United States. And immigration is, and this is why it's so important that we have immigration reform and continue to have immigration, is because it is one of the driving engines of your economy, right? Fuck the xenophobia, Republicans. You got to learn that immigration is, no one will deny that immigration is what built this country, right? Even your right-wing MAGA types are going to say, oh, yeah, okay, yeah. But it's too late and it's too much and the border's open and bullshit. We need as many people as we can coming into this country to continue to drive the economic engine. That's what it's all about. And so, and which ties into what you were talking about, is as this population ages, I mean, look at how many people are like, who's retiring at 65, first of all? I don't know anyone who's, I have one friend who's retired. She retired at like 55 because she landed a job as a police officer in Boca Raton and retired on a six-figure income. Other than that, I don't know anyone who's retired at 65. I don't know anyone who's retired at 75. And, you know, as you look at it, it's like, why? I don't have any plans to retire in the next 20 years.
I don't either. But I've got a friend. I do have one friend who is my age, you know, high school class of 83. He was somebody I knew from debate who retired 2 years ago.
Wow.
So, now, the thing is, he's very, very good with his financial planning. He was very, very good with his investments. He had a high-paying job to begin with, but very good with his investments, and had a cancer scare. And just sort of said, you know what? I think I'm done. I can live quite comfortably. My wife and I can live quite comfortably on what we've got. And, you know, he's doing well. And so he just decided to retire. I know somebody else who had started working for the federal government right out of college. And so he was under the old federal retirement system. And the thing about the old system, not the system I'm under, the old system was set up in such a way that there really wasn't any reason to hang around once you hit retirement age. So because he's making, with the way everything played out, he's making about $500 a month less than maybe it's $500 a pay period. Now, I think it was about $300 a pay period. So it was about $600 a month less retired than he was when he was working full time.
Right. Here's a point, Dale. Yes, I agree. Legal immigration, I agree. The problem is the Republicans don't want anyone coming into this country except rich white people. And the problem is we need a lot of labor in this country. Yeah. And it's not all going to be rich white people from the Scandinavian countries as Donald Trump wants. I mean, that's just absurd. So we need more, what's the N1 visa? We need more people, lots of people at all levels and all jobs and all coming in. So legal immigration, those numbers need to be jacked up. I'm not saying open borders. No, legal immigration, but we need legal immigration. It needs to be a priority, and we need to be welcoming people from. We are not even close to having too many people in this country. So, we could have 5 times the number of people in this country, and we could be fine.
So, the thing about rich white people from Scandinavia, why would you leave? Why would you leave Scandinavia? So, yeah. And so, anyway, not talking. No, guys, we're trying not to talk politics here. We're talking policy. That there's a difference. Yeah, and the other thing is, I'm not going to go there. That question that Eric just asked is a little too close to my day job. Because Alec at one point said, "Hey, why don't you come on and talk about Ukraine sometime?" And it's like, yeah, no, I'm not talking about my day job, because I want to be in a situation where if public affairs for my day job says, why didn't you tell us about this thing? Or, why didn't you come and get okay to do this Starfleet Tactical show? I'm going to say, really? Starfleet Tactical? Really? Yeah. We have a position on starships. Chris will not be talking about this. I will tell you, Eric, I consider it China. China is the biggest threat. Ukraine has proven that Russia is not a major threat. Iran, no. North Korea, only a threat because they're so erratic. And I will point out that the crazy leaders of China, Russia, and North Korea are all Donald Trump's best friends. But I'm not getting political there. But I think it's China, and I think we basically it's the next 50 years it's going to be China, and it's because they've got the economic engine. But they will, if we can outlast China,
if we can continue to grow and outlast China, and the world doesn't boil to a crisp, I think the United States is in a pretty good position.
Yeah.
But, and the other thing to your point is, I mean, I looked at my Social Security statement and it was like, oh, you're going to make, if you wait until you're 70 to start taking Social Security, you'll get whatever it was. And I was like, oh, why would I take it any earlier? It's like, I'm working. I don't need my Social Security now. I need more money, later. So, good. So anyway, okay. So what are we talking about tonight? Oh, we got Mad Cat is back. Mad Cat, thank you, Mad Cat. Mad Cat says, what happened in the NCAC 1701E? Well, all we know from that episode is that Worf did something to it. Worf says, that wasn't my fault. So something happened in the Enterprise E when Worf was the captain. We know Worf was the captain of the Enterprise E after Picard, but we don't know what happened. So no one knows.
That's funny.
Yeah,
that's funny.
There's a great channel also that I've been listening to. He's a young guy and all his YouTube videos are about all the hardware, military hardware in the world, and he's spending a lot of time talking about. So yesterday I watched his brand new video about Poland and how they've introduced their own infantry fighting vehicle.
Yeah, Task and Purpose.
Yes. He's awesome. I watched that video. I go, how long did it take him to make this video? Because
I have noticed. Big fan of him. Big fan, right? I do notice that there's some topics he's clearly more comfortable with than others. Whenever it starts talking about geopolitics, etc., you can tell he's reading somebody else's script and it isn't quite there. When he's talking about like that one where he's talking about infantry fighting vehicles and how it's modular and this and that and the other thing, that was a pretty good one. That's a pretty good one.
I was just amazed. I was just like, wow. I'm also amazed how there was an interesting question on Quora, and it was and they were talking about tanks and something about tanks and why are the Russian tanks so bad that why they're so bad that they're just getting killed left and right by javelins, and it was interesting. The guy that answered it was a military expert, and a bunch of guys who were like chimed in to agree with him, who were all like ex-military, and they all said the same thing. It's not the problem. The reason the Russians are losing so many tanks to javelins wasn't because they're losing so many tanks to javelins. The problem was they don't use the infantry to screen their vehicles, and all they do is stay out, and the Russians just stay on the roads. And it's like, well, where do you think the ambushes are going to happen? So every single person said the reason our tanks survive is because there's always infantry in front of them. Which, going back to World War II, right? That's what the Germans were doing. That you always had infantry in front of your tanks. Your tanks weren't leading the charge because otherwise, you're going to get spanked.
Yeah, and you have the tanks there to back up the infantry. You have the infantry there to back up the tanks.
Yeah, exactly. So, which I thought was, I thought was really interesting. But yeah, so again, the name of that channel is
Task and Purpose.
Everyone, if you're watching this, you should definitely be subscribed to Task and Purpose because it is a fun channel. And some of them I don't watch, I literally spent 20 minutes, a half hour watching a video about Polish infantry fighting vehicles, and it was fat because they're basically replacing their BMPs, which are the Russian ones from the last, that are 30, 40 years old.
Well, and the Poles are doing some interesting stuff. The Poles have gotten together with the Koreans because for
the K2. He did a great video about the K2.
Yeah. and some other people have done videos about that deal too. The Koreans are willing to do technology transfers and help them learn how to build the factories. And the thing is, they're on opposite ends of the planet. They don't have issues. Their foreign policies are not going to run into each other, right? So you don't have problems like the Poles have problems with the Germans, in that the Germans put all sorts of strings on their stuff because they're both in the same neighborhood and they don't want the Poles causing problems. And so at first you look at it and you go, I don't remember the Koreans as being this huge, when you think I want to go out and buy a fantastic tank, how far down the list do you have to go before you get to Korea? Well, the thing is, the Koreans are actually pretty sharp. They're learning a lot. They're getting better. The Poles are willing to pay the money to do it right. And there's some areas where the Poles are pretty good too. And so it's actually, it's one of those, when I first heard this, I went like, what? But the more I looked at it, the more I listened to it, it's like, yeah, that's a pretty good deal for both of them.
Yeah, and Task and Purpose did a video on the Korean K2 tank. And basically the Koreans spent 20, 30 years licensing technology from everyone else, from the Germans and from the US, and were like, frack this, and decided, like 15 years ago, we're going to bring it, we're going to learn and they literally sent their people to the United States to study and learn about how to build tanks. And then they started their own industry, which Koreans are really good at. And I think Hyundai's involved. I think Hyundai was involved, right? And they basically said, we're going to build our own tanks. And their tank is really damn good. And so, and Poland has just bought some ridiculous number of them. I forgot. Because Poland just took delivery of 115 M1 Abrams. But I think they ordered, I don't remember, it was like 500 K2s.
Yeah, it was something like they put in an order for like 200 or 300, and then Ukraine kicked off, and they said, on second thought, double the order.
Yes, right. Yeah, and so that's really interesting. And then it was interesting in the video yesterday how Poland, and first of all, when you see a map, you realize Poland is sitting between Russia on the east and the rest of Europe on the west. I guess Germany on the west, right? And so and the other thing I didn't know, which was interesting, was it's flat. Like in the middle of the Northern European plateau, right? So it's totally flat. So they're like, well, we don't have any mountains, we don't have any valleys. So they're like, the way they think about tactics is got to be different as well. But their basically goal is to be the biggest armed force in Europe, just to prevent Russia from getting any wise ideas.
Yeah.
And I guess the good news is, after Ukraine, they're like, okay, well, we're in pretty good shape. We need to get up to here, but yet we're not. I don't think Russia's invading Poland anytime soon. And Poland's part of NATO, so that's just a stupid idea for Russia. But Poland's really serious, and they basically consolidated all their military industrial complex. And so has, which I thought was interesting. So boy, every time I hear about Poland, they're serious.
There's one other YouTube channel that I really recommend. Somebody mentioned Ward Carroll's channel. His
aviation channel.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what his call sign is. I can't remember. In any event, his channel is really pretty good. There's another one called Perin, Perin. Started off as a gaming channel. He then he started doing Ukraine stuff, and then he had to create a new one called Perin Gaming to go back to, that's where he does the stuff that he used to do. But the Perin channel, he's really good. He's some sort of like defense economist or something like that. There's Ward.
So this is one of the channels that you guys should all check out. Ward Carroll. And then the other is Perin.
Oh, you're looking at task and purpose. Yep.
So here's the other one.
Today, we're going to analyze one of the world's most...
So task and purpose, that's another great one. You'll see all this video. Why Poland switched to their new Barsuk infantry vehicles is the one I watched yesterday, but they're all really, really good. And then what's the last one that you want me?
PERIN. Okay.
It's a military channel?
Yeah. Hold on a second. Let me see. I think I spelled that right.
Oh, PERUN. This one?
Oh, yes. I misspelled it. Yeah, that's it. And he does lots of stuff on I'm trying to, there was a couple in particular that I thought were really good. Let me take a quick look here.
While you're doing that, let's just, Mancat gave us a $5 super chat saying, any chance that Janeway hijacked the Voyager with 7 to 9 to help the Enterprise? Well, I tell you, now we're all spoiling the new Picard episode, which if you haven't seen, it's your own dumb fault, because Jerry Ryan told you to watch the episode because it was going to get spoiled. Yeah, it wouldn't have been fun if like they took the crew and like, you know, and they had Raffi and Seven and Shaw, and they all went to the museum. They all like, okay, everyone grab a ship.
So do we think that they just leave like big gobs of antimatter in these ships when they put them in the museum?
Yeah, I mean, what was said somehow was that like that none of those ships are working. That they're all right, which makes sense. They certainly don't have photon torpedoes and you know and active warp cores. It makes no sense, right? You need impulse power to power the ships.
And you know, if they wait until these things are sort of like rode hard and put away wet, I can guarantee you that they didn't bother to go and fix up the warp core.
Yeah,
unless they're considered to be in the reserve, which is possible.
Yeah,
which is possible.
That's certain.
Yep. I agree with you, Dale. Well, Dale would know better than I, actually. So whether I agree with him or not does not change the fact that he knows more than I do about this particular.
Yeah. And by the way, someone else was like, "Oh, you're talking politics. I'm leaving." Listen, I listen to Doomcock's channel on a weekly basis, and half the stuff he says, I totally don't agree with.
Well,
you know, I still enjoy his channel.
I'll take a different tack on it. So for things like the Chris Cappy doing the thing on the Polish tank, Polish infantry fighting vehicle, Perrin stuff. Perrin did one on how corruption destroys armies, theft, graft, and Russian failure in Ukraine. I mean, on the one hand, okay, yeah, we're kind of talking politics, but on the other hand, we're all people that are really passionate about science fiction, right? What is my shtick? My shtick is talking about the real world and how you can learn stuff in the real world that you can then apply to science fiction. I always tell people my science fiction fandom superpower is that I can talk about real world navies and science fiction navies at the same time, right? And, you know, it's funny, I have these conversations with my buddy Andy Presby, who one of these days I'm going to get on the show, and some topic will come up, and I'm just famous with him for saying, you know, I've got a page of notes on that, right? Because at some point, like, I've got a page of notes on the implications of perfecting immortality and how it changes based upon how the immortality works. Like, for instance, if you take the immortality treatment early, does that mean you can have kids for your entire life? What happens if there's no natural end time to when you can have kids? What does your society look like? How does it affect your science fiction background? And, we see some very interesting examples of exactly that one. Like you've got Carl Hansen's Hybrid Universe. He did 2 books back in the 1980s, War Games and Dream Games. And they were both really interesting books. In that society, basically, they perfected immortality, and the human race is in the process of going extinct because everybody's gotten bored. And when there's no drive that you have to have kids while you're young, people just stopped having kids. So it's the family equivalent of moving to Washington D.C. and then never seeing any of the monuments because I can always do that, right? And then you never do it.
And Ace says, yes, it has been asked a ton of times. Ace, feel free to listen to our podcast or watch our videos or read our blog to find out the answer to your question, but and answer your question next summer at San Diego Comic-Con. So there you go. And Wilhelm has asked us, how did the Klingon D7 end up the Starfleet Museum? I think Terry Metalis may have been the one that said that was a Kronos 1 from Star Trek 6. Who knows how they got it? I have no idea.
Well, why would we think that would be hard? I mean, seriously, there's got to be. So we had a long alliance with the Klingon Empire,
right?
And at some point, they're decommissioning these things. And I'd be willing to bet that there's a Constitution class cruiser in a Klingon museum somewhere.
I'm sure, right?
Klingons do museums, right?
Exactly. Hey, and getting back to the other point about politics is like, listen. I personally do not believe. I'm with William, I think it was William Brennan, one of the Supreme Court justices, who said the Second Amendment does not guarantee individuals the right to bear arms. It guarantees a militia being necessary. Therefore, an individual. The whole idea was that the country would not limit your ability to bear arms because we needed a militia, and if we had to call you up to be in the militia, you needed to have a gun. That was the whole purpose of the Second Amendment. So this whole bullshit that you all have, no, you don't all have rights to bear arms because we no longer have a militia. It's obsolete. Personal opinion, backed up by a Supreme Court justice. That's my opinion. However, we have a Second Amendment. And so the other day, I think it was yesterday or the day before, I called Dale Simpson up, who's on here. And because I was like, what is your opinion, being a former law enforcement officer? Dale was a deputy sheriff for 20 years. I said, with this permitless carry bullshit that they're instituting in Florida, I'm like, what are your thoughts? And because I've heard a lot of, for police departments, it's driving them crazy. Dale was like, hey, I think it's okay. Why should I have to pay a tax in order to have a pistol? Okay. I don't agree with Dale, but I wanted to hear what he had to say. And I think one of the problems in our society, which you'll rarely hear me give the both sides argument. But the problem with both sides of the political spectrum, the one thing that is no one wants to listen to the other side. And that is a problem. And we want to silence the other side. Listen to what they have to say. Now, in the case of election deniers, the people who think that Donald Trump was a voted president, you're out of your fucking mind. There's no facts anywhere in the world that support what you say. So you're an idiot if you believe that. That doesn't mean that you can't go around and say that. I just think you're an idiot. However, when I asked Dale why he thinks permitless carry is okay, I don't think Dale's an idiot. I think he's really, really smart. And he's a former law enforcement person. So I wanted to hear his opinion. I don't have to agree with it. And I don't have to be offended when he tells me what his opinion is. And I think this is really important. And the left is just as bad as the right on this one issue. And that one issue is trying to silence the other side because we don't want to hear their opinions. I think we should all hear, whether you agree or not. Everyone has an opinion. We can listen to it. Some are educated, some are not. I don't listen to Fox News because they're all full of shit. Okay? But then again, I get my political news from a conservative Republican podcast, The Bulwark, because I want to listen and hear what conservative Republicans have to say. And I agree with 90% of what they say. Because they're really moderates and in middle of the road. So please be open. Please listen to what other people have to say. Don't get offended because someone has a different view of you. And ultimately, we need to seek the truth. whatever that may be. We don't have to agree on a lot of things, but we do have to agree on facts. All right, let me get off my soapbox.
I threw this comment from Write Up about, he said, even with permitless carry, he still renewed his CCD, which is good for another 7 years. He actually lives in Florida. He's in like in the Destin area around Eglin Air Force Base. And so hidden in that statement is something that I think is what he's referring to, but he didn't actually go so far as to say it, which is, yeah, okay, if you live in a permitless carry state, that's great. You don't need a permit. It also means your gun stays home when you cross the state boundary. Because if you don't have a concealed carry permit that has reciprocity with some other state, then you don't have reciprocity with some other state. And so my guess is that's probably why he has it, so he can take his gun with him without having to jump through all sorts of hoops when he goes someplace else.
Yeah, well, just because you have a concealed carry permit doesn't mean you can that you can take it to another state.
Depends on which permit you have and whether it has reciprocity or not. Now, note for the record, I know this because my brother has a concealed carry permit. I don't. But he said that, like, you try to go and get one from a state that has reciprocity. And different states have reciprocity with different other states. And so it's not unusual to like, oh yeah, go get this one, because this one, if I have this one, and this one, I have 45 states covered. Something like that. I would rather have the legal document saying I'm trained. Yep.
Yeah, listen, and that's part of it. It's like, I need to pass a driving test in order to have a car. Okay. I should have to pass a safety test in order to have a gun.
So you know what my favorite twist on the Second Amendment is?
What's that?
That's the lens that I look at Robert Heinlein Starship Troopers through, right? Because what if the right to bear arms, if citizenship is contingent upon you being in the military or the equivalent, then the right to bear arms shall not be abridged. And so, I mean, I love that book, and I do a presentation on that.
Oh, book. I love that book.
And I think if you do a search for me on YouTube and Starship Troopers, you can probably find 2 or 3 different versions of that presentation. Well, I did it 2 or 3 different times on YouTube, I think. In fact, I think somebody else probably remembers better than me, but I think I actually may even have done it for the channel. I may have done my Starship Troopers talk for this channel, like a long time ago, like episode 20 or something like that. But in any event, that book it's very interesting how he set that up in terms of there's only a handful of instances in which you are prevented from joining the military or the functional equivalent thereof if you have been convicted of a crime, or if you don't meet the age requirement, or if you fail to pass a test that says that you're mentally capable of understanding the oath.
Yeah, listen, I am also firmly in favor of 2 years of public service, military service, whatever, as standard. Like, you turn 18, you graduate from high school, you go into the service. And I'm okay if that's some sort of domestic service, some sort of Peace Corps, whatever. But, listen, I wish someone had kicked my ass into the military when I was 18. I mean, not having served is one of the few regrets I have in my life. I wish I had to do that. But
I wish I would have told the recruiter, no, you don't understand. Because at one point I was looking at joining the Navy, and I called up and I said, this was post-Desert Storm. And I said that I was interested in joining. And the response was, what science degree do you have? And I said, political science. And they said, sorry, we're not interested. And at the time, because I didn't know any better, I didn't know that the official motto of the P3 community was poli-sci ready to fly. Instead of saying, what I said was, oh, I'm sorry I wasted your time. Thank you very much. What I should have said is, no, I didn't ask your permission. I asked you, how do I do it? So now you need to tell me, how do I do this?
Yeah.
So if that had changed out a little different, I would have ended up as a surface warfare officer circa 1991 or so.
Yeah. So I am totally in favor of 2 years of service, and that would fill your citizenship requirement. But I think so. I just, I think I wouldn't mind if the first 30 days of that 2 years was spent learning civics.
Yeah.
Right. Send everyone to class for 30 days, and and you cut one day and you're gone. You're starting over again.
Now, so in general, I agree with the idea of some sort of requirement like that. I think that just a requirement like that probably has some issues associated with it. So it has to be part of a bigger package. And I'll note that the military was really happy to, in a lot of ways, to get rid of that. Getting rid of the draft caused them a lot of problems, but it also solved a lot of problems.
Which I think is what Jen's talking about here, yes?
Yeah, that's exactly what he's talking about. There's a lot of truth to that. And so that's why, I think at a minimum, you can't just automatically say everybody goes into this particular job. And the problem is if everybody in your system doesn't want to be there, you end up spending a lot of time fighting the fact that there's a lot of people that don't want to be there. So the question is, how do you create a system where people want to be there? And I don't have a good answer to that. But I do know that it's something that's a lot more systemic. And I actually think that science fiction is a fantastic way to explore these things. People always point out, a lot of people will say, well, Heinlein system is totally unworkable. How could you possibly have that, right? How could you ever transition to that? How could you have that? To which point I say, Jonathan Swift wrote a novel about a guy who went off on a sea voyage and he met an island full of little tiny people. And then he met an island full of giants. And nobody said to him, that's just not realistic. Right? Because they understood that it was, first of all, a fantasy, and second of all, a metaphor for things, right? When Philip Jose Farmer wrote a novel where people would be in suspended animation for 6 days a week and they'd only work, be around 1 day a week, nobody said, how on earth would you make a system like that work? It's a what if story. And one of the things that science fiction is really good about is like, well, what if you did this? Let's explore some of the logical implications of it. And so I would argue that's what Heinlein was doing in Starship Troopers. Is that, okay, maybe it was consistent with a lot of his views on service, etc. But it's clear, it's clear that Heinlein did not think, he was very explicit about this, he did not think that there should be a mandatory requirement. He also thought that everybody should volunteer. He wanted everybody to volunteer. He didn't want a mandatory requirement.
Yeah, well, you could also do this is the point where you have to serve 2 years. You can serve it in the military, or you can serve it in some sort of public service, some sort of Peace Corps type service, or maybe it's like, okay, you want to go and become a doctor, a veterinarian, something. Good, you give 2 years, so you can go do that first, but then 2 years out of college, you're doing for you're working for the government type thing. And then that's how you get the right to vote, which is kind of the Heinlein thing, right?
I don't know what the right answer is, but I'm inclined to think that the right answer involves an incentive structure of some sort. Like, what if your college education was free if you had done your 2 years?
Yeah.
And this wasn't one of those things where you could just phone it in.
Right.
Do something more than that. Right.
Eric says, would immigrants also, well, if they wanted to become citizens? Yeah. Again, right? If you want certain rights, you do the right to vote.
The thing is, right now, you do not have to be a U.S. citizen to join the military, to join the U.S. military. You do not. Now, to be an officer, you do, because officers have security clearances. And you can't get the security clearance unless you're a U.S. citizen. It used to be the case that foreigners could have U.S. security clearances, but thanks to Walker and some other spy scandals, that went away. So even people that people that were, I know people who became U.S. citizens because they worked in the U.S. They were British citizens. They worked in the U.S. for the U.S. DoD, and they all lost their clearances because the regulation changed, and so they ended up having to become U.S. citizens in order to make it work out.
And one of the big questions you need to answer, Chris, is how the fuck did a 21-year-old get all that sensitive top secret information?
So
21 years old.
Yeah. So the answer to that is being a grunt level intel guy, because a friend of mine who used to be that guy, right? He's now a senior intel guy. He used to be a very, very junior intel guy. He made the observation, it's because they don't pay well. And you end up, it's a lot of the grunt level work ends up being done by those folks, right? And so, because the other thing is that's the profile of the military. It really is. In my job, I need to remember to say this in such a way that it does not highlight exactly who I work for. In my job, I attended a training session about a year and a half ago, where somebody was saying, well, that senior leaders were saying, well, they're part of our organization. So all these millennials have to adjust to the organization. They have to adjust to us, right? We don't have to do anything to adjust for them, to take them into account. They're part of our organization. And the guy who's teaching the class, his response was, that the way our organization is structured, they're 95% of the organization. So like if you go on board an aircraft carrier, what do you think the average age of the people on an aircraft carrier is?
I have no idea.
It might be 20.
Holy shit.
It might be as high as 20.
Oh.
But if you think about it, right? Okay, at the very top, you've got an admiral. He's probably the oldest guy there.
Right.
And he's probably in his 50s.
50s?
Maybe.
Wow.
Right? Maybe.
Wow.
Probably low 50s. Right? Because if
I should have gone into the Navy JAG Corps like I planned to do.
So let's say that you got commissioned at 22. And your time in service starts at 22, which means you didn't go to the Naval Academy. So your time in service starts at 22. At 52, you've been in for 30 years. And so and it's an upper out service. So if you're not getting steadily promoted by that point, if you're not like an admiral or really damn close, this entire Maverick, they had to jump through so many hoops they should have just said, he looks really young. Let's just pretend he is. But the vast bulk of the flight deck crew and et cetera on an aircraft carrier, it's a pretty steep, it's a shallow pyramid. There's not many people in the top and there's a lot of people on the bottom.
Right.
And most of those people never went to college. They finished high school, they joined the Navy. And so or at least pretty darn close. The thing about like you go on an aircraft carrier and it's like a high school. It really is.
And that's why Bill Maher was joking about this on his show about this kid's 21 and the people he was trying to impress were teenagers in his little group, his little, Thug Central or whatever they called his Discord group. They were all like 18. Like the guys that turned him in were like 18, and that's why they're like, I don't know. It's crazy.
So yesterday I was at a science fiction book signing at the Book Loft in Columbus, which is a wonderful little bookstore that is incredibly misnamed. It should be called the Book Cave or the Book Maze, not the Book Loft, because lofts are big and open, and this place is it's like 22 rooms. It's a bookstore that has 22 rooms in it. So in any event, we were there. Patrick Childs was there. He just had a book come out last week for Bain Books. Really, really good guy. Dan Cobalt and my friend Joel Presby, who you may notice has the same last name as Andy Presby, and they were both in the Navy. And they met at a science fiction convention that I was at. But I always claim at least partial credit for the two of them getting together because I had the good sense to not meet either one of them at that convention and get in the way. I didn't meet them until like 10 years later. So in any event, we were at this science fiction convention, and where was I going with this? I totally lost lock. We were talking about young kids and you know what? I was going on down a path and I totally lost lock on it.
All right.
So okay. Yeah, so he points out this guy was National Guard, not Air Force. Yeah, I mean they're young kids. They're young kids, and there's a lot of them there.
Yeah, clearly, and it's just it's crazy. All
right, TJ, I'll take a look.
Yeah. Hey, the other thing here's another thing. I'm it's disturbing that there's a portion of the right wing in this country that thinks we shouldn't be supporting Ukraine. And a lot of that is due to, excuse me for getting political, Donald Trump's kissing of Putin and Tucker Carlson's ass kicking of Orbán in Hungary. Just like it's the right, there's a huge authoritarian fascist element now to the Republican Party, whether or not you right-wing people want to believe that or not. And they all look up to these authoritarians. Look at the way Trump talks about Putin or Xi or Kim, about how great they are and how smart they are. Really, Putin's a fucking idiot, because he's smart, but he's also an idiot because the whole failure of the Ukrainian invasion rests on Putin, and so these guys are not geniuses; they're authoritarians, right? And so we shouldn't be supporting those people, and we shouldn't be, we shouldn't be thinking that Putin is someone we should be admiring. We should be admiring Zelensky. And you hear all this crap from the right wing about Zelensky, and half of it's bullshit. That he's putting Christians in concentration camps and stuff. It's just a lot of crap. And my problem, first of all, kudos to Biden for not only keeping NATO together, but making it stronger. And a lot of that credit goes to Putin for invading
NATO
Ukraine.
Salesman of the Year for 2022.
Yeah. But listen, Biden's done a great job keeping NATO together, and now we have Finland and Sweden. Finland is now in NATO, and Sweden is on the cusp, making it stronger, and that's what we need. Listen, if it was me, I would have. The day I was sworn into office as president of the United States, I would have dropped 100,000 troops in Ukraine and then said to Russia, now you guys try and invade us, right? I would have sent them everything they wanted on day one. I would have made sure that the Russians got their asses kicked. But even without that, look at what we've learned about Russia. And I don't know, this is now to turn this back over to you, Chris. I'm really curious if in the military intelligence community now, the consulting class, if you will, what they're saying, how many people are saying, well, I told you they were all paper tiger all along. And how many are saying, wow, they really suck. And we didn't know that. There's got to be a divide in there because, we've been hearing about how impressive the Russians were and they were going to be in Kyiv in 3 days and everything. And nothing has changed. They still have shit tactics and shit personnel and shit training. And so you tell me.
So let me start off with a couple of caveats, okay. Aside from just the one that I'm being very careful. One is that I'm a naval guy first and foremost. And I know more about airplanes than I do about tanks, which doesn't mean that I don't speak for my employer, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't mean that I'm ignorant about these things, but it is the case that my knowledge, I know I have professional level knowledge about the United States Navy. I have sort of hobby level knowledge about Army stuff, a little bit of professional Army knowledge just because I had Army guys in the cubicle next to me when I was at the Defense Intelligence Agency. Second caveat is I purposefully have not gone spelunking for classified information on any of this. So I'm, my sources are YouTube and Washington Post and things like that. I really haven't gone researching it, in part because I don't have time, and in part because, okay, if I were in the business and I had, I was sharing a cubicle with my fellow Intel guys, we would all be reading it. We'd all be talking about it all the time. And I'd be in the Army cubicle saying, Whiskey Tango Foxtrot. And I'd be calling up my guy in the Russia branch at DIA and say, hey, what did you guys know, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm not doing any of that. So I've just kind of staying away from it. But, from where I'm sitting, what I see is a situation where they're missing the fundamentals.
Who is?
The Russians.
Right.
The Russians. Yeah. It's fundamental that you deploy with infantry. It's fundamental that you have to have your maintenance done. It's like they're not doing the fundamentals, and they thought they could just roll in. And so the question is, why is that? And that's why I would recommend that Perrin thing.
Yes.
Where was it? I scrolled down. Let me scroll up again.
Here you go.
How corruption destroys armies, theft, graft, and Russian failure in Ukraine. And because one of the things he talks about in there is about how he goes into something that I had already sort of realized.
When we think of war, we usually
and that is kleptocracies are always rotten from the top to the bottom. And
right.
That's because you can't be
cultural.
Yeah, it's cultural. You can't have your hand in the till without other people knowing it. And so you have to let them have their hand in the till too.
Yes.
And so the comment that he makes is that, Putin most likely is getting status reports. And the status reports come from somebody who clearly, either was telling a lie or passed on somebody else's lie. But it starts at the very bottom. And it's like, and at every step along the way, people have an incentive to make the lie work for them. And so as it passes up, the lie that gets to Putin is not the lie that started at the depot. It's gone through several layers, and those guys have all added on to the lie. And so by the time it gets to Putin, it's like, yes, all of our guys are commandos. They're all the equivalent of, we've got nothing but Spetsnaz. They're all 8 feet tall, etc. And so, but Putin's not dumb, right? He knows that if he gets a report that says they're all Spetsnaz, they're all 8 feet tall, it's like, no, they're not. Take 2 feet off. Okay, but it turns out they're all 4 foot tall. And he thinks they're 6 foot because he was told they were 8 foot.
Right.
There's some great stories that have come out of this. And, I haven't been able to verify them. To be honest, I haven't tried. But they're stories that have the stink of truth about them. One of them was a story about how they went to a reserve depot to tell to do a spot check to see about, getting those tanks ready to be deployed. And when they got there, they discovered that of this depot of 100 tanks, there were about 6 that were running.
Yeah.
And that's because they'd been selling tank engines for years.
Yeah.
They kept about 6 of them running so they could do parades.
Yeah.
But they've been selling off all the parts for years.
Yes. Yes. All right. I think there was something in Task and Purpose about that.
Yeah. And and if you think about it, that makes a lot of sense because we're starting to see some really old indications that they're getting ready to deploy some really old tanks while skipping some that are newer. Why would they do that? Well, maybe it's because, and I'm just making up numbers for illustration purposes. Maybe, we've got 1,000 T-72s in storage, but only about 100 of them are things that we can get working anytime soon because, it's not like you're going to sell the engine off of one and this part off of another, et cetera. Things like the engine are where the money is.
Well, and that's what Task and Purpose he was talking about. He was talking about that those tanks that are in storage have to be stored a very specific way, and that no one's doing that. And again, this is all cultural. And again, as you said, it's a kleptocracy from the top down. And you know, it's just the way there is no incentive to be excellent there. The incentive is, how do you get ahead? How do you cheat the system? How do you whatever? And there's no incentive for these guys to do it. They're all like, what can I get for myself? Because I'm not getting it from my job. I'm getting paid $19 a week or whatever the fuck. Yeah, and so that's it. So when you really dig into the Russian logistics and the Russian infrastructure and everything behind the military, it sucks. It sucks. So my question to you originally was, how much of this, now that we're finding this all out, how much of this was known by the intelligence community in the U.S. beforehand? How many people in the intelligence community are going, I told you it was a paper tiger? And how many people are going, holy shit, they really suck? That's kind of my big question.
And the one thing I don't want to get into you know, how money moves around in the intelligence community and stuff like that, but I can say from just sort of anecdotal experience while I was a member, that you had like at my old agency, you had a couple of directors in a row who basically thought, yeah, who cares about Russia? They're not the threat. Other people are the threat. And so they're moving money around and they're taking it from the Russia guys and they're giving it to other people. And part of it was to plus up the China guys. But part of it was just like, you know, I don't care about that. I've got these other things I want to do. Right. So, yeah. So in a lot of ways, the issue is, you know, the intelligence, if you don't have people collecting and you don't have people analyzing, then what people sort of think, you know, what their gut feeling is, doesn't, you know, that's not how you do that job, right? Especially post 9/11. I have never, ever been part of an organization that cared than the intelligence community of the handful of professions I've been in. They are second to none about asking the question, how do I know that? How exactly do I know that? Why do I think that's true? Are you sure about that? And it's really kind of interesting because the balance is, on the one hand, you're taught to be very particular about it. You know, you got to have sourcing and you got to do this and you got standards and, you know, you're constantly graded on how you apply those sorts of things. And then on the other hand, there are times where like you'll get a document and you go like, the footnotes, I've looked at the footnotes. I pulled those documents and the footnotes do not support everything that's said in the paragraph. Why is that? And so you call up the author and you say, hey, Bob, reading your document. Great work, by the way. But I noticed that on the third paragraph, you had 2 citations. You mentioned 4 countries and you've got 2 citations. And those 2 there's one of those countries that's not mentioned there. What's going on? And the answer is, yeah, that's at a higher classification level than that document.
Oh, interesting.
So the funny thing is on the one hand, you're taught that you have to question everything and you have to have standards. And this isn't just about what your gut tells you and all this other stuff. But on the other hand, you've got this situation where frequently you're being told, I'm going to have to ask you to press the I believe button on that. And that's not bad, right? And part of it is you do all this training and you have a lot of trust in your colleagues. And so a lot of times you know, it's like, I know those guys, I know the training levels they're going to. If Bob says that that's true, I might go to Bob and say, hey, can you explain this to me? I'm trying to understand what's going on. And so I can be better, can you just explain it to me? But you don't go and, that's a lot of times you're being asked to just sort of trust that somebody did their job. By and large, the system works. But remember, in the intelligence community, there are two different kinds of problems. There are fielding problems and there are batting problems. Fielding problems are the ones like, who's going to be the head of the Labor Party when this person steps down in 6 months, right? Fielding problems are the sort of thing where if you're getting fielding problems right 90% of the time, 95% of the time, your boss is going to tell you to step up your game, because it should be pretty damn close to 100% of the time. Batting problems, if you get batting problems correct 30% of the time, you're doing fantastic.
Right. Well, I was listening to someone this morning talking about this. I was listening to Bulwark, and they had a guy, a guy on, and he said, what he said was, you would have to see the documents that were released. And he says, in looking at what was released, he says, you want to look for when someone's saying, well, how damaging is this information? And he said, it depends what the sources were of the information. He said, if there's a single source after that, if someone says this, and here's the source, that's good intel. He said, but if you say this and we have a number of, there's a number of unidentified sources that have contributed this. He says, then that's not so, then I'm not quite as convinced. He says, when I see that you have a source that you're back, that you're backing up, he goes, that's when I'm believing that the intelligence is good, which gets to what you were saying.
So there's one of the things they talk about is confidence levels, and confidence levels are interesting in that a confidence level is not how strongly do I believe something is the case,
Right.
Confidence level is how much sourcing do I have to back up my case.
He talked about that. Yes, right. That's what he's talking about.
And so people get confidence levels all wrong. They like it's not unusual to see something that says, well, there are some combinations that make more sense than others, but it is not inconceivable that you can say something that is written like there is a high probability of X happening, low confidence. That's kind of weird, but it's not as weird as you might think. And what that really means, the translation of that is, this is a no-brainer, but I've only got one source. and like the warning guys, the warning intelligence guys will frequently say things like, if I ever write a report, if we ever send up a report that's anything other than low confidence, we waited too long. Because the purpose of the warning guys is to say, hey, excuse me, just thought you might want to know, we think we might see something. All right, not your business, right? And so there's some people that are like just sort of like, hey, Bob, just thought you might want to know that we think this is going on. We'll let you know later. I'm giving you a heads up. Be prepared to. And then there's other people that it's all about, getting into the depths of it. Like, when they publish something, they're like right. They T's are crossed, I's are dotted, etc. And it's part of the job description to do those things differently.
Well, I think that, first, before I get to Wilhelm's comment here, I will say that the thing that we've learned in Ukraine is how bad the Russian training is. And conversely, we were training the shit out of the Ukrainians.
The Ukrainians, and this is something, everything I know about Ukraine, I know from just like watching the news, etc.
Right.
One of the things I saw about Ukraine is, Ukraine had the dust up in 2014 with them taking Crimea and stuff like that. There was some other stuff that happened in that region. Ukraine was kind of a shit show militarily before that, but they got their wake up call. Right. My wake up call involved an emergency room and some cardiac tests. Their wake up call involved Crimea. And so they said, we got to change. We got to fix this. And so they did. And so they basically totally revamped their military. They came and they said, we need help We need training, and they got training. And so the thing is, the Ukrainian force of 2022 looks nothing like the Ukrainian force of 2014.
Right. Yeah.
Right. I
Yeah.
mean, they are proof of how much you can do. They did, as near as I can tell, they did a full court press for 8 years because they knew it was coming.
Yeah. And as far as what Wilhelm's saying is U.S. is using Ukraine as a testing ground for the potential of the. I'm not sure I agree. And again, what do I know? I'm just reading and watching videos and but I don't think I agree with this because they're two totally different fights.
I'm skeptical about a testing ground, but I will say that anytime there's a conflict like this, everybody who thinks that they may have a dog in a fight pays really close attention. It's clear that the Russians and the Chinese paid incredibly close attention to Desert Storm. The Russians in particular, I mean, the Chinese sort of said, oh shit, we need to prepare for this going forward into the future. But the Russians, it's like, the Iraqis may not be the best example of implementing Soviet doctrine because Soviet doctrine had a tendency, the Soviets weren't about standing on the defense. They were about going on the offense. But the Iraqi army was quite big and it was equipped with Russian stuff. They were Russian trained and equipped, and we rolled over them like they weren't there. And, people stood up and noticed. And there was a bunch of, Chinese analysts going like, okay, this is what their force multipliers are. They're writing down, this is what their force multipliers are. And they've got a column next to that says, what are we going to do to counter that? And so I don't think that this is something along the lines of like, we're necessarily testing stuff like that, but we are paying attention. If nothing else, people are leaving stuff strewn all over the battlefield. And, you can go in. I wonder what the inside of this thing looks like. So that sort of stuff always happens, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that the China situation is more than anything, the China situation is going to involve naval battles, not land battles with Taiwan, with China invading Taiwan. And, just look at what they tried to do in their training exercise for a blockade of Taiwan. I think, and listen, I'm looking forward. I kind of am missing the old days when the Republicans were the ones who were like all hawkish about the military. Now it's the Democrats, and the Republicans are like, no, we don't want to. We want to stay home, America first. Well, that's not. We don't have the biggest army in the world by a factor of 10, so we can protect our borders. It's a projection of power and a projection of policy and a projection. It's that you have to be in Ukraine if you want to protect the United States. You have to be in Taiwan if you want to protect the United States.
So I'm clearly not going to get to it tonight. But one of the things that I'm going to talk about when we do next time, we'll try to get to this, and I'm going to be doing the Trent Hone section. And Trent is all about the development of U.S. Navy doctrine in the interwar period. And so, there's this tendency that we think of isolationism means that, we didn't have a military, and we largely didn't have an army, but we actually had a pretty decent Navy, more than a pretty decent Navy. And we did a lot of analysis and thought it through and figured out what our doctrine should be in order to maximize it. And, we were what is referred to as a garrison force. So, we stayed in our home ports, right? When the ship went home, it went to San Diego. And when we went out to sea, we didn't go and do a 6-month deployment in some far area like we do now. We would go out for a couple of weeks and then we come back. But we were underway all the time. Al Nofi, in his book on fleet problems called To Train the Fleet for War, it's available from the government printing office. He was writing that when he was at the Center for Naval Analysis. And it's a fantastic book. So Al at one point was in the office a couple of doors down from me, and Al was fantastic. Which reminds me, I owe him a phone call. Well, he owes me a phone call. I called him and he hasn't called me back yet. But the fleet went to sea all the time, and we practiced really, really hard. We just didn't have a policy of going and camping off somebody else's coasts in order to do that. And this is one of those things that to tie it back into science fiction. Those of you who've been around a while remember I did a building a Navy talk. In fact, I think it was a two-parter where I go through all those different things. And one of the things is how exactly do you do that? Do you deploy a lot or not? The advantage of deploying is that you can have influence in a particular area. In fact, people have made the argument that for a long time there, the Brits kept the seas safe, and then they couldn't do it anymore, and we took it over. And so in most parts of the world, you can just sort of sail around in a freighter and not really have to worry about it. Few parts of the world, like, if you can stay off the coast of Somalia, you probably want to stay farther off the coast rather than closer. Straits of Malacca can sometimes be a little dicey, but even then, most piracy is really insurance fraud.
Huh.
Which doesn't mean that there isn't any piracy. There is clearly piracy in some instances, but most piracy is somebody defrauding their insurance company by sort of like they'll sell the ship for scrap and then still claim the insurance or something like that. And I knew somebody, the brother of a former colleague of mine was a policeman in Hong Kong for a while. He's a Brit. And then he became an insurance agent. And by insurance agent, I mean a guy hired by insurance companies to do sneaky stuff and investigatory stuff. And one of his jobs was to sneak on board ships in port and put transponders on board. So if the ship disappeared, the insurance company could push a button and get a GPS location on where the ship was, because this was something, and they didn't tell the people that they had a transponder on board because they didn't trust their clients. He told a story about one time he sneaks on board. It was hard, but he snuck on board, put the thing in the location, flipped the switches, got back out, and they basically called up and said, "Yeah, it's not working. We think the battery's dead. You got to go back tomorrow." So we went back the next day. And I spent a lot of my time thinking about how do you convert something like that into a science fiction story, right? I mean, science fiction should be easy, right? All you have to do is just know stuff in the real world and write in space on the end. At some level, you can do that. And that's one of the things that that's one of the things that I think that this channel is different than most other channels, is that, my goal is to get people to sort of understand how to think about all the different parts. So if you want to write your own science fiction, you can put all the parts together. That's why I spend time talking about things like doctrine, because when I look at doctrine is a way and I'll go into this more the next time. Doctrine is getting everybody on the same page so that when it's time to give instructions to your force, you can say, here's the 3 paragraphs on how we're going to do things different than what the doctrine says, as opposed to saying, here's the 30 pages of what I want you to do, right? It's standard operating procedures. And when I see things in Star Trek, I don't think the writers think in terms of doctrine, but you can kind of see it happening. And I would love to see a Starfleet doctrine pub, because I'd really like to know how much of their doctrine is built into their computers, how much of their doctrine is just that, when Picard goes back to his cabin, is he reading tactical manuals to get up to speed on the current doctrine? I've got this idea that every time a starship pulls into base, they're uploading all the tactical doctrine and all the software is getting uploaded, because there's a group back at Starfleet Command that does nothing but collate data from all the different starships and update the tactical doctrine. And they've got a differentiation between what the computer is responsible for and what the crew and the captain are responsible for. Because I think that in a lot of ways, Gene Roddenberry famously said that they're all astronauts, so they're all officers.
Right.
I think another way to look at that, the ambiguously ranked Miles O'Brien notwithstanding, I think another way to look at that is the ship is the crew. That the crew is really the wardroom. All the people we see are the officers on board, and the ship does so much of the work. The ship is basically the enlisted guys that do everything. So it's a fascinating topic. Thank you, Alec, for, I wouldn't quite say shanghaiing me into doing this. But I mean, I've told the story about how after, I did the show twice, and then Pat and you and I did the show, and then Alec didn't ask us if we wanted our own show. We just discovered that he had changed the name of the show and we had our own show. At no point did he ask us, which I think was actually a pretty good read on your part, because it's like, well, shit, yes. Ow, let go of my arm. Stop working my arm.
Oh, God. Yeah, well, no, it's worked out well. It's worked out well.
Yeah, and so I've still got some. I'm going to get through the Connections Online conference, and then I've been thinking about things like, setting up a Starfleet Tactical Discord server and doing some other stuff, etc. And because my attitude to date has always been, if we create the content and get the content up there, we can always sort of repackage stuff and market it after the fact, etc., etc. But it's always been, it's like almost every time I start seriously thinking about that, I find myself in an emergency room. So knock on wood, hopefully not this time. Because I definitely want to go in that direction.
Absolutely. So. Well, I think it's probably a good time to wrap it up.
Yeah, 97 minutes. Let's go ahead and wrap it up. And for the record, I got to my second slide, and that includes the cover. So next time, assuming no Pat, which chances are no Pat because Pat's not available for a while, we'll talk about Trent Hone and the doctrine of the 1930s. And in the last one, I talked about how Harris Landing sort of taught people how to think about battleships. Trent Hone talks about the importance of doctrine and how we sort of, the doctrine we came up with in the 1930s to solve this particular problem of, we had a slow battle line, and we knew that everybody else was going to be faster than us. And how could we make that work to our advantage, or at least not make that work to our disadvantage? And I still plan on having Trent on the show at some point. I've got a lot of ideas that involves a little bit of prep work, and I just haven't had the time to do the prep work. So,
all right,
we'll make it happen.
Well, thanks everyone for joining us. Everyone get a good night's sleep. Enjoy your Sunday tomorrow, and have a fantastic week. And Chris will be back next Saturday.
And maybe you?
Maybe. Oh yeah, if you need me, I think so. I don't think I'm doing anything next weekend.
All right, check your schedule. We'll talk later.
You got it, everyone. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate it. Have a great night, and everyone check out Picard this week. It's going to be a good one, as well as The Mandalorian, which was awesome. You guys take care.